I think that just as we're living in a nuclear age, we have grown so tremendously in scientific knowledge. It doesn't seem too much to say that men can begin to awaken to the fact that they haven't grown enough spiritually and haven't recognized their spiritual capacities.
Once something like eating is death, then you've struck at the very heart of life. The enemy of the older radical theories may have been the ruling class, but today the stakes of whether we will reform ourselves into a new kind of human being, a new kind of society, whether we will find selves worth being, the stakes of it are simply life itself.
In ethics, he devotes a whole chapter to friendship. And you might think, well, I mean, friendship is good, but what's it doing in a book on ethics, right? Like that sounds like a topic for a different book. But on the contrary, Aristotle thought that it was absolutely integral to the concept of ethics, and that you couldn't have virtuous people if they didn't support each other in their virtue. And so that's what his treatment of friendship is all about. We are social by nature in his view. And remember, the solitary person in his view was odd. I say exceptional because sometimes I'm solitary. So I'll use that term, right? But I work very hard to be social. And Aristotle thought, honestly, that a solitary person was unnatural, and that people were built for socializing. And so friendship was just natural to human beings. But for Aristotle, the question was, what kind of friendship, and what are the qualities of friendship, and can we rank friendships? What's the best kind? And so in this chapter, he goes through multiple types of friendship and gradations, but some of the big ones are the friendship of utility, the friendship of pleasure, and the friendship of mutual goodness. The friendship of utility, in his view, I think is the least, it's not that it's not at all good, but it's the least good. Because the friendship of utility has to do with people benefiting somehow in a material sense or in an emotional sense from the relationship, and oftentimes in a sort of one-sided way. As long as the utility is there, people will remain in the relationship. But as soon as one or both of them are not receiving the useful whatever it is, then the friendship will dissolve. So it's very utilitarian. The friendship of pleasure, in his view, is a little bit better because it means that the friends are together enjoying something, usually maybe some like mutually enjoyable activity. Like you're both movie buffs, so now you've got your movie buddy to go to your art films with, or, you just love wine tasting. So, you've always got this go-to person for your wine tastings or your baseball buddy, right? And so there's a little bit more value there because the pleasure is oftentimes of an immaterial nature, which I think Aristotle, as well as Plato, thought was better for human relationships. But the friendship of mutual goodness is far better than those two. And so we're going to spend more time on that. And part of the reason why, of course, is because it is that type of friendship that is conducive to the right ordering of society and actually developing all the virtues. Because you can see how the friendship of utility or the friendship of pleasure could actually, in a lot of cases, lead people to actually becoming more vicious, to be developing vices rather than virtues. So only this type of friendship is really capable of helping you become more virtuous. Now, he talked about how there are all these different kinds of relationships between people that are not equal. Okay, so he goes through all of them and he talks about how They can be kind of equalized based on unequal love. If you read this, you might have been a little confused about this, but we all know that there are friendly relationships that are nevertheless really unequal. They may be unequal in rank or strength, wealth, knowledge, okay, position in society. These are some of them here. He did include husband and wife, and he said the relationship or the friendship between husband and wife is, he called it aristocratic, which means that the wife was the inferior of the husband in his view, but their relationship was based on mutual respect. And that kind of characterizes Aristotle's thought on these types of relationships. The equalizing factor that can make people relatively equal in these unequal relationships is unequal love. I don't think that probably a lot of Christians or other religious believers would really vibe with this particular thought. But what he's saying is that the unequal person, such as the wife or the servant or the follower, would, by all rights in injustice, love the superior more than the superior loved them. And in this way, the love would kind of fill the void and equalize the relationship, because the inferior would be giving the superior his or her due, mainly his, but also her sometimes, okay? And so in this relationship, you couldn't expect there to be like equal power, but there could be an equalizing of regard if, for instance, the superior feels like, yes, I am giving more, I'm doing more, I'm making decisions, but I'm also getting like more love than I'm giving, right? I have many people who love me as the superior one. This person is showing their dependency on me by loving me more, and in his view, that equalized. But those relationships, I will say, none of them can ever be the best type of friendship in his view, because there's still this inherent inequality that's based on nature. Okay. In his view, you know, there were these natural hierarchies, these natural relationships of inferior and superior. And even that equal love or unequal love couldn't fully fill the void, right? So none of them quite qualified. And so they did help build virtue to a certain extent, but it was virtue through the role, right? So like to be a virtuous wife would be a lot about being obedient and following the husband's lead, or to be a virtuous child would be to be, you know, obedient to one's parents and to certainly not mouth off to them. Something that I suppose some of you guys can probably still endorse. The virtue of a servant or a slave, very controversially for Aristotle, was again to be obedient and to recognize the master's capability and authority, right? So the virtues were different. The virtue of the master would be to be benevolent and to forbear and to give proper orders and guidance, right? So we're not talking about equals, but we are talking about the possibility, if done right, of mutual regard. So that gets us to what's left over, which Aristotle thought of as the best friendship, okay? Now, the best friendship can only happen, according to Aristotle, between similarly good people. They share the same virtues, the same understanding of the virtues. They practice them in a roughly equal way. They are also obviously kind of in the background already social equals. So they're not those unequal relationships. So we're in Aristotle's world, this would have been, you know, mainly among male citizens, okay, in Athens. They are based upon equality like that. And while there may be some inequality, for instance, one male may be somewhat smarter than the other, this is the type of thing that can become equalized through continual dialogue and through, recognizing each other's relative capabilities and talents. So there's no fundamental, unbridgeable inequality. It is based on reciprocal goodwill. And he says, friends are friends for their own sake. And this is very important, right? Not for utility, not for pleasure, even though both of those things can be gotten in these friendships, but they're they take a backseat, or they are the fruits of the friendship. But the friendship is such that people wish for the best for their friend regardless, right? And that alone gives them the satisfaction of the friendship. And he says this cannot happen. You cannot have this best friendship unless you, quote, live together. Now, that doesn't mean literally. You didn't have, a bunch of guy friends back in Athens just all residing in the same house or in gangs. What he's talking about there is that they would see each other daily, that they would, frequently be in conversation, that they would know what was going on in each other's lives. And they would spend time together because it was this kind of contact that allowed people to know each other well enough to be able to have a complete friendship. He says in book 8, complete friendship is the friendship of good people, similar in virtue, for they wish goods in the same way to each other, insofar as they are good, and they are good in themselves. Hence, they wish goods to each other for each other's own sake. Now, those who wish goods to their friends for the friend's own sake are friends most of all, for they have this attitude because of the friend himself and not coincidentally, not utilitarian. Hence, these people's friendships last as long as they are good and virtue is enduring. And this is important because if virtue slips in these friends, that is the one thing that there's two things. That is one of the two things that can mean an end of that friendship. If one goes off the rails and stops being virtuous, okay, is changing enough in their values, to use our parlance, that they no longer are in sync together, this would be one of those things. He says, this is Aristotle again, he says, these kinds of friendships are likely to be rare, since such people are few. Moreover, they need time to grow accustomed to each other, for as the proverb says, they cannot know each other before they have shared the traditional peck of salt and gained each other's confidence. Those who are quick to treat each other in friendly ways wish to be friends, but are not friends unless they are also lovable and know this. For though the wish of friendship comes quickly, the friendship does not. And so the other thing that can degrade or end a friendship of this kind, as he says directly in book 8, is if they are no longer able to spend time together. The friendship will last a certain amount of time if there is a gap in their ability to actually continue along in the conversation with each other, but there comes a point where the gap is too great or the time is too long, and then the people will kind of drift apart. Also, he says, the friends have this quality of reliability if they are the best of friendship. He says, it is only the friendship of good people that is immune to slander, for it is hard to trust anyone speaking against someone whom we ourselves have found reliable for a long time. And among good people, there is trust, the belief that he would never do injustice to a friend, and all the other things expected in a true friendship. But in the other types of friendship, distrust may easily arise. And I'm sure you can imagine that, right? If a person has not had enough consistent long-term evidence of another person's character, of their reliability, right? that friendship is more likely to be utilitarian in nature. And then when any sort of suspicion comes in, it grows because there's not that information based upon longstanding experience, right? And that can erode the friendship. All right, so this is a great part of Aristotle's ethics, this topic of friendship. And hopefully I've done a decent job of explaining why this one type of friendship is better. If that friendship exists, they will be supporting each other in their virtue because it's their virtue that keeps them together, because they share their values in common and they speak the same language and they rely on each other. There's a lot to lose. And so they support each other in the continuation of their character and the development of their character. So another thing to know is that Aristotle thinks that personal friendships feed political friendships and not the other way around. In other words, it is not the best of friendships when people form political thoughts first or political ideas first and then go seek the friends that will help them to pursue those goals, social goals of whatever kind. But rather, the social goals should be flowing out of the friendships that people have made organically with each other, so that their concern and care for each other is why they have the political goals. Otherwise, you've got a utilitarian relationship again, okay, where you, the friend, are now like the means to the end of this political plan. All right, so the friendship has to come first. And then he talks a little bit in this book, and more in the politics, about how citizen friendship forms, right? It forms out of those friendships, out of the tight-knitness of already existing friendships and associations. So it's supported by personal relationships and subgroups of friendly people, right? Groups of people who already know each other well, work together, share values. They then support the polity, if it's a good one, right? The which is the some kind of government, right? Some sort of social order. They are, in this respect, genuine equals as citizens within whatever that is, the polity that they form, right? If they're not equals, they don't have that friendship that started it all, right? They've got more like the friendship of inferior and superior. So you might have like a tyranny or a kingship or something like that. But Aristotle's polity was actually this idea, rather ingenious, of a mixed government whose basis was equal citizenship and sharing of ruling and being ruled in turn according to one's capabilities. So you can see that, such a society would foster a lot of good friendship, and that it would require a lot of good friendship and fellow feeling and sense of wanting to support the common good, because that's what would be good for all of us.